10 o'clock. So if we could all grab our seats. Senator Berthella is dealing with a constituent issue. He'd like to address the committee. Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. I do need to step out from the meeting. I just wanted to let the secretary know it's not because I don't want to hear what you have to say. I have a constituent in my office that I need to go and take care of. So, but I will certainly follow up with you and your office if I have questions. But thank you for being here. Sorry that I'm going to miss your presentation. Thank you.
Madam Administrator, are you all set now? Are we able to? Okay, if we could, do we need to wait for CTN? Yeah, yeah, I don't know what to do. I don't know how long. So, Representative Nuccio is on leave right now. I believe Representative Zawistowski is standing in for Representative Zawistowski. Do you have a few words to say?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and look forward to hearing this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Walker.
Good morning and good morning, Mr. Secretary. I look forward to our conversation in the next 89 days we're going to spend together. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Administrator, is CTN all set now? Do we know?
Good luck.
Is CTN all set now? Yes? Okay, great. Thank you. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for joining us today and for your presentation to leaders the other day and the governor's remarks yesterday to outline some of the key proposals that you have. I believe you have a presentation to show us, and we'll save questions for the end of the presentation. So if you wouldn't mind starting that presentation, and I hope that your drive home is better than your drive in.
Me too. Well, good morning, Chairman Senator Austin, Representative Walker, Representative Zawistowski, and Senator Berthell, who's left us. If Representative Nuccio is watching from home, which he probably is, hello to you. I am the Secretary of the Office of Policy Management. My name is Jeffrey Beckham. I have with me the staff or most of the staff of the Budget Division of the Office of Policy Management, who I'm very grateful to be able to work with, very proud and happy to be a part of this team. They do tremendous work, and I want to give a shout out to all of them. Thank you so much. We've been at this for a couple months, and our work product is in front of you today for your consideration. I won't belabor the slideshow. It's been on our website for about 24 hours now. Folks have had a chance to take a look at it. We obviously briefed the press on it yesterday, quite a lot of press on that. I'll try to move through this quickly so we can just get to your questions. So, is it up?
Hi.
So the governor continues to be proud of the bipartisan two-year budget that we enacted just 8 months ago, cut taxes and made record investments in a variety of policy areas that people are very concerned about. Our midterm adjustments, likewise, will make additional investments in some key policy areas. And we are preserving the largest income tax cut in state history, as well as the increase in the earned income tax credit. The budget continues to be balanced and adheres to all the constitutional and statutory fiscal guardrails. And in just a second, we'll put our presentation up for your consideration.
Technical difficulties like this always make me think of the air traffic control system. Largely
Everybody, I know we just started today, but if you can make sure that you've silenced muted your computers,
and make sure
please.
There you go. All right. Right.
Here we go. No,
Are
Are we good?
we are good, but we need people to silence your computers, please. Is that computer silenced? Or is the button on the top? I know. I should say something.
Is that me? Sue?
He wasn't doing it.
Is everybody's computers now? No, they're not. Can all of you check your computers, please? How about yours up front?
Muted.
It shows up on our screen as Ali Blancato
Yeah.
is not
Just
muted.
have to,
I'm muted.
She's
muted.
is it muted? Is hers muted?
He is. Ally turned on.
Everybody, you need to check your computers, please. Has everybody muted their computers? I believe it sounds like you might have. Yes? Are we good? Yep. Everybody's computers muted? Sounds like they are. Okay, Mr. Secretary, well, I think we've gotten beyond the technical difficulties.
I rather
not
doubt that,
certain.
Madam Chairman,
Just took
but
22
we'll
legislative
proceed.
figures.
So we'll get to slide 4, which is an overview of the budget at a pretty high level, just to get you acclimated with the numbers and the problem we were solving for. On the left, you have all of the 13 funds that are comprise the appropriated funds within the Appropriations Act for the enacted budget for this 2 years. We are proposing adjustments in some, but not all of the funds. We're going to have a number of slides on the general fund adjustments, but just to get going with the special transportation fund, you see there in the second column, that savings attributed there are attributable to debt service that we were able to save due to a
Jeff, just continue going over. We'll get everybody a copy of the slides, so
ma'am.
just keep going.
So we're going to make
please.
some savings in the special transportation fund of about $25 million, the bulk of which is attributable to a proposal that we have in our package around use of some of the cumulative surplus in that fund. Municipal revenue sharing fund is going to come in for some savings because there's adequate resources there to pay all of the municipal grants that are due without having to use all of what's appropriated there. So we have a little bit of savings available in the MRSIF, as we call it. In the insurance fund, you're probably aware there's a program that purchases vaccines for children. We have a sufficient stockpile that we don't have to make an additional purchase or as large a purchase in the next year as we thought. So we're advised by DPH that we can lapse some funds and save some funds there. Obviously doesn't help us in the general fund, but it does help us with cap room. I'll also note on that slide, it's number 4, if you ever get there, additional $1 million in the tourism fund to do some statewide marketing at DECD. In the general fund, we're going to tell you eventually we'll tell you how we got back to balance in the enacted budget. We had $9 million in balance for the second year in fiscal 25. This most recent consensus revenue had us better in the general fund by almost $60 million. So we had $9 million of room, another $60 million to the good. But our technical updates, which are almost $200 million of deficiencies, less the lapses, as well as adding the new proposals that we have, it's about a $200 million problem we had to solve. So to get there, we proposed some policy changes, about 70 million of which are on the revenue side and about 63 million of which are on the expenditure side. It gets us back to balance. If you accept all of our recommendations, we'd be balanced, albeit somewhat narrowly, at 0.6 million in the second year. On slide 6, we have, it's in the, all of this material, of course, is in the budget book, which is also online with the slideshow. The slideshow is also online on the OPM website. We go through our, the $200 million problem, which starts with deficiencies that we have to resolve. We have about $100 million item in Medicaid. That's a large account, as everyone knows. It's about $8 billion. About half of that is the state share of about $4 billion. So just to reflect increased utilization, increased caseload that was not anticipated, we need to make an additional appropriation in Medicaid of about $100 million. We have new valuations for our pension funds. That's the state employees retirement system, the teachers retirement system, as well as the judges retirement system. We have some experience there with those funds in terms of the performance of the fund, as well as a lower waterfall last year than we were anticipated. We thought we were going to get a larger number in the waterfall that happened after the session. Revenue had tapered a little bit after the time we enacted the budget, so we had less principal pay down. So our ADEC was not able to be committed to the greatest extent that we thought. So we're going to make an additional appropriations of $81 million for the ADEC. That's the actuarially determined employer contribution to our pension funds. We have an accounting treatment change we have to make for the higher education alternative retirement plan. Some of you may recall there's a subset of the higher education employees who are in an alternative retirement plan. So last year when we did the fringe rate change where we took onto the general fund the obligation to do the pension payments for higher ed, which was a tremendous relief to them in terms of their budget requirements. We treated this particular item as a revenue loss. In consultation with the comptroller's office, we're advised that the appropriate treatment there is to make that an expenditure charge. So we're showing that as a charge this year on the Approps side. In Department of Correction, their OE account is running a deficiency of about 15 million. Their actual expenditures last year were about 86 million in OE. That's related to things like electricity and food. They're obviously running 24/7 facilities around the state. They're currently budgeted at about 71 million, so we're going to add 15 million to true them up in that account. That's a little ahead of where we are, but we're on slide 6. Yeah, so you can see about halfway down, still in the first half, we are reflecting some revised operating requirements in DDS. That's programming that was slower to get up to speed, as well as lower caseload utilization than was budgeted for. In the revised debt service line item there, we're advised by the state treasurer that we can save about 70 million in debt service under what was appropriated, and it's not required in the next year.
All right.
So
I
all
will,
told, net all other there at the end, but all told, that's about a $200 million problem that we were solving for. We start to solve that in the next block, although we add to it first with some new policy proposals. We've got slides on some of these going forward, but on this slide, let me just let you know about the judges' retirement system. We're moving to a new amortization methodology for them, similar to what we've done with the state employees and the teachers' retirement system. It will allow us to save that amount in the general fund this year. We have on the second line there, various grants in DECD, supporting those with carry forward as opposed to a general fund appropriation. Those happen to be legislative earmarks that I was at pains not to mess with in this budget. I didn't want to go there. So we preserved those, but we're going to use carry forward. DECD is lapsing some funds for a project that didn't go forward, so we're able to use some carry forward to cover that this year, saving that amount in the general fund for other programming. So we got about 63 million closer to solving our problem there at the end of the page. And on the next page, we get all the way back to balance on slide 7 with some revenue changes. We have slides on all of these going forward, but that's the new total resources number there is 23,233.5. We do the revenue cap calculation because we are appropriating money in 25 in this act. So we have to apply the revenue cap. Gets us to our new number of available resources of 22,943.1, which matches the number 2 slides back, which got us back to balance. Telling you what's going on with revenue, the January consensus that we agree with OFA on has us, as I mentioned, about 60 million better in the general fund. That's the good news, although softness in sales tax is of some concern to me. But we are at the moment 60 million better in the general fund. The volatility cap revenues, though, which are reflected in lines 8 and 9, are off quite a bit. That reflects the stock market changes last year and folks experiencing those losses. Those are obviously the businesses who pay that tax, as well as the higher net worth individuals who pay the estimates and finals portion of the income tax. So that's off $200 million. If you net both of those, if they were all in the general fund available for appropriation last year, in other words, if we didn't have a volatility cap transfer and if we didn't have a revenue cap, we'd be in the red in the current year or in next year by $150 million, meaning I'd have to recommend tax increases or spending cuts of $150 million before I got to the deficiencies, before I got to new policy proposals. I don't have to do that because we have a volatility cap and we have a revenue cap that's keeping us in a good spot. We have multiple of our sister states who this year are having to cut spending and raise taxes to stay in balance, but not in Connecticut because we have our guardrails. Getting to our new proposals. We're starting in the education and early childhood area. The first slide is around early childhood. The governor's proposing a $20 million additional appropriation in the general fund for those purposes. Care for Kids eligibility being expanded to 65% of state median income. Some other items that OEC will be able to devote more resources to includes the navigator process for child care workers seeking health insurance and other benefits. The Smart Start program is funding additional pre-K slots in public schools. That's currently funded with expiring federal funds. So we're picking this up in the general fund. That's a theme where we are seeing some funding that we started with ARPA with the federal funds, where we think it's a beneficial and necessary continued expense. We're recommending that get picked up in the general fund. The single funding stream program, it's the school readiness and child daycare contract programs and school readiness councils coming in for some more resources at OEC. In the Birth to 3 program, there's a mobile developmental screening tool for parents of children aged birth to 3 that's getting more resources. It's called the Sparkler in Birth to 3. We're augmenting this general fund proposal with more ARPA. We've identified some ARPA that's available for use, and we'll have some slides on that. But we're going to continue the stabilization grants to some of our providers, particularly in the high need areas. That's something we've been funding with ARPA to date. We're going to continue that. Some technical assistance for child care operators, as well as a tri-share pilot program in Eastern Connecticut. The tri-share refers to the employer, the family, and the state. It's trying to get employers more involved with the child care system that we have. We have a note at the bottom of this slide that from fiscal year 19 to the proposed upcoming fiscal year, the state funding for early childhood, just the state funding, not all the extra federal money that's been provided, will have increased from about $214 million in 2019 to, if you accept our proposals, about $404 million, or 88% increase in child care from the state side in the last 5 years. Getting to the K-12 discussion, this is a reminder of where we are with ECS. ECS funding growth over the last several years is up by $345 million. The governor's budget honors the acceleration that the enacted budget provided for the new ECS formula. It's accelerating to be fully funded 2 years early, reaching full funding in fiscal 26. And more detail, actually, here's the next slide, gives you some information about ARP-ESSER funding on slide 12. Here we go. Down lower right, you can see the total amount of ARP-ESSER. This is federal funding to the school districts. There's still $406 million of ARP-ESSER out there in the districts to be spent on a variety of initiatives. The 10 largest districts with ARP-ESSER are listed there on the left. We also list their ECS entitlement in the last two the 2 fiscal years of the biennium and what the increase was in 25 over 24. Which brings us to last year had an initiative at $150 million of a line item titled Education Finance Reform. It had some implementing legislation, but not complete in implementing legislation. So we're adding some implementing legislation this year to provide in the second column what the governor proposes to use for each of those line items. In ECS, I mentioned we are fully funding the phase-in, the acceleration. We're actually adding money to that line item to adjust for increased enrollment. I'm sorry, I think this is related to the school meals initiative, but we're adding additional costs related to ECS, so that's fully funded at the current statutory amount. For charter schools, that is an adjustment based on the enrollment figures. It fully funds it at the current statutory amount, so we didn't need the full amount that was budgeted. For magnet schools and open choice, the magnet school number is changing a lot, and I'll explain that in a second. But just for the schools themselves, we did not get implementer language as to how the new amount was to be spent on magnets. So we've added implementer language in our education implementer that will increase the per pupil grant by 3%. The underlying statute merely provides that they not get less than they got the year before. We're actually adding language saying we will spend an additional amount to get to a per pupil grant that increases by 3%. It's true of open choice as well. So there's savings in those line items around that. With VOAG schools have a statutory amount that is not always fully funded. It has a within available appropriations provision, but we are with this amount fully funding VOAG schools at their current statutory amount. School meals. So this is a pickup of the federal funding. We've been using ARPA to fund the universal free breakfast as well as the reduced price meal subsidy. We're going to continue that. We're still split funding it this year, half in the general fund, half in ARPA. But that is going forward with a pickup in our budget to continue that program that would otherwise go away because the federal funding is going away. But we're proposing to continue that. The LEAP home visiting program has been a nationally recognized program. It addresses the chronic absenteeism problem. We still have a terrible issue with kids in some of our urban areas, especially still not coming to school. It's an overhang issue from the pandemic. This has been fully funded with ARPA to date. We are picking this up in the general fund, $7 million item to continue the LEAP home visiting program. So the bulk of the magnet school savings here is a $48 million item, which was not related to spending more resources in the classroom. It was simply a tuition shift from districts to the state. It capped the sending district's liability to the magnet schools at 58%, with the state having to pick up the balance. That represents a permanent liability to the state. It represents a situation where you were always going to have escalating costs with no particular guarantee to the operators that the state would pick that up. The sending districts have to pay it. The state, it's at your discretion every year how much we put on any line item, so they would not be guaranteed the same amount of money going forward. We think that's an opportunity to save resources for the general fund to spend on the items that we have here. That $48 million, since it was a shift of the costs, didn't actually involve new teachers, didn't involve anyone getting a raise, didn't involve any resources to the classroom. It was just a cost shift to the state. So all told, you had about $102 million in new resources for classrooms budgeted in the underlying budget. This year, we're proposing $107 million in new resources to classrooms. So we have actually increased the commitment to K-12. In the area of health and human services, we believe there's an opportunity to save some money in Medicaid. We began this discussion telling you about a $100 million deficiency in Medicaid. It's a large account, and even small movements in Medicaid can be big dollars. So where we have opportunities to try and save money, we like to try to do so. In 2019, the eligibility for parents and relative caregivers of children on Husky A was increased. So you could, if you're a parent or a relative caregiver and you're below 160% of the federal poverty line, get coverage, healthcare coverage under Husky A. Since that year, we have a new policy innovation in Covered Connecticut, which is a subsidized part of our healthcare exchange. It's got a blend of federal subsidies, tax credits, cost share reduction subsidies, and some Medicaid match for lower income folks on the exchange. We can move these parents and relative caregivers from Husky A to Access Health. They'll still be covered. They won't lose any coverage, but they'll be shifting to a qualified health plan on the exchange, which would increase participation on the exchange, strengthen the exchange. It would give those individuals continuity of coverage. Should their income increase above 160 FPL, they'd be on the exchange, they'd be covered. Their subsidy mix might change. They might have to pay a little more. But if they stay on Husky and they get past the 160 FPL, they hit a cliff and they fall off and they lose coverage. This would continue their coverage. It gives us a chance to cover the same universe of folks, but cover it in a different way, leveraging some federal subsidies, and saves us. It's not a big number in 25, but 2 years from now, it annualizes at a $33 million savings in Medicaid. It makes that much more money available to spend in Medicaid as those needs arise. So we think this is a smart move, keeps those folks covered, just does it in a different way. The medical debt issue's been in the press quite a bit lately. We're hoping to conclude our negotiations with the contractor who's going to do that new program for us and hopefully relieve 250,000 individuals of their medical debt. It's about $650 million in medical debt we're hoping will be alleviated. But new for next year, we're proposing some ARPA funds. Again, we've identified some ARPA funds that are still available. 500,000 to the Office of Health Care Advocate to create an online platform so that people can check for their eligibility for various financial assistance programs related to their health care. We think it's a logical follow-on to extinguishing medical debt, but also making sure going forward people don't incur new medical debt. Those other two items there indicate that for the Office of Health Strategy, we've got some new positions and new resources being provided for those purposes. Office of Health Strategy is going to be working on some prescription drug affordability programming through a board that will be established, some enforcement of entities that exceed cost growth benchmarks, as well as reviewing some activities around affordability at health insurance companies. Going to add a position at OHS to do some work on financial oversight of hospitals and hopefully strengthen our oversight there. In the area of children's behavioral health, very important issue that we did some initiatives with federal funding, ARPA. We are picking up some of this going forward. We know this is an important issue that we can't go back on. So those urgent crisis centers that we established, there's 4 of them around the state. They provide an alternative to emergency department visits for youth experiencing behavioral health crises. We've got a mix of ARPA and state funding, state share under Medicaid in the general fund going forward. At DCF, some ARPA funds to continue the activities they're doing around transition of kids from acute and subacute levels of care to the community. Strengthening quality for long-term services and supports in the area of ombudsman at Aging and Disability Services. We've got an additional position for the Community Ombudsman program there, assisting families and individuals who have long-term care issues. Some ARPA funds for DPH to do a Center for Excellence model design so that nursing homes can get some advice about achieving and maintaining higher quality. As well, some ARPA funding at DPH to create a dashboard, a nursing home dashboard for consumers, families and individuals who are tracking complaints, comparing nursing home quality, and reviewing recent health and safety violations. We've got some language in the Health and Human Services Implementer that would begin to phase out 3 and 4 bedroom wings or blocks in nursing homes to hopefully improve infection control as well as overall quality of life for residents. We've got some targeted investments to strengthen the safety net. Homelessness has been an issue that has gotten a little worse lately. We've got some new resources going to DEMIS for some wraparound services to match some federal housing vouchers. We've got 12 new positions programmed for DEMIS to do some homeless outreach and engagement for high-risk unsheltered individuals with complex needs. We've got some additional resources going to the Outreach Access and Recovery Program that helps folks apply for disability benefits and hopefully get them the first time they apply. That can sometimes be a difficult process for folks who are applying. We have a new supportive housing pilot in DEMIS for individuals with autism. It involves 15 new housing vouchers. We think case management and other wraparound services can be supported within their existing resources. Other initiatives. At the Department of Labor, they have an Office of Apprenticeship Training. We're going to add some resources there to help them do some programming into new areas like healthcare, IT, early childhood, and teaching. At the community high schools, the Connecticut technical high schools. They are in communities, but they're not community high schools. We have a new career center. This will be at Vinyl Tech in Middletown to hook the kids up with employment opportunities and try to align the employer needs with that system. As well, we've got some ARPA funding coming to OPM to support statewide resiliency planning and climate preparedness. Governor has a climate resiliency bill with a number of new programs and planning there. We're going to be trying to coordinate some of that at OPM with some ARPA funds we've identified. That middle item there is actually a capital budget item, but DEEP's got an ongoing grant and loan program for microgrids and resiliency planning. We're getting some, it's a new capital authorization that we'll be talking about with the Finance Committee. 3 positions and some resources at DEEP to support their becoming an agreement state with the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. This is where the NRC will delegate to DEEP to regulate sources of radiation in our state. This will actually leverage $1.7 million in license fees that we'll be collecting, so it will more than pay for the cost of the program. The governor continues to invest in the criminal justice system. We've got new money for DESPE for continued implementation of the clean slate law that we enacted a couple of years ago. DOC has had recent issues with assaults, increasing number of assaults on both the inmates as well as the correctional officers themselves. We're going to add some resources there to bring on additional correctional officers to help supervise that population and hopefully minimize that phenomenon going forward. Got some additional resources for DOC for chaplain services to increase the availability of those services. We know we have an obligation to make that available to the folks who are housed in our facilities. Judicial is getting some additional ARPA funds for some IT innovations that will help facilitate their processes in the courtrooms. In the area of the Special Transportation Fund, just reminding you of where we are with the numbers. I mentioned consensus revenue earlier. Those revenues got a little better in the STF as well. So we will in fiscal 25 have a $122 million operating surplus for that year. But on this page, you'll see on the lower left, almost $1 billion in the current cumulative fund balance. We propose to use some of that. We're going to take it away here in the right column, the second to the lower line there, spend $503.9 million of that balance in service of the proposal on the next slide, which comes to us from the Office of the State Treasurer. Eric Russell and his team gave us this idea. We thought it was a good one, so we're going to put it in and see what you and the Finance Committee think about this. It's the same concept that we have for the Budget Reserve Fund, where when it hits 18% of current year appropriations, the balance would pay over. Obviously, the BRF pays down some debt as well as pension obligations. This would be used to pay down special transportation obligations. So we would save debt service in the operating budget of the STF in the following year. Actually, it saves immediately $22 million in FY25. It would save $60 million in FY26 and $75 million by FY28. It's going to mitigate those future budget deficits in the STF. This maneuver by itself keeps the STF in the black for the operating budget in fiscal 26. We're still in the red in fiscal 27, something we'll have to address in the next biennium. ARPA. So we've got some new allocations, most of which have been on slides that you've seen up to date. These are the new allocations we propose. We don't have slides on this, but I'll just draw attention to the State Department of Education has a Science of Reading master class. It's the third one down, $3.5 million. That's to enhance the skills of reading teachers. It's a one-time expense. As well, right to counsel and judicial for $2 million. That's to assist folks who are facing eviction. Judicial will be working with a contractor for that purpose. At the very bottom on the right at $10.9 million, that's a placeholder account at OPM. We do not have that allocated or programmed, so that's available for your consideration. Note that the funding here is available, and I think we have a slide following on, but the next slide shows funding is available based on revised estimates of expenditure requirement of some of these allocations. The bulk of it is savings in the COVID response measures item, which we held at OPM. We found post-pandemic that we were a little over budgeted there. We don't need all of that for all the PPE and the warehousing and all that. So we're advised by DPH and others that we can save some money there. The other large item there is in DEMIS. It's about a $12 million item for electronic health records. We're going to pick that up in the capital side. We're going to use capital funds for that so we can free up this ARPA funds for use for your consideration. ARPA, of course, is temporary. It has to be obligated by the end of this year. If you obligate it via a contract, you still have 2 more years through the end of fiscal 26. to expend it. But if we get to the end of this year and we're not able to obligate those allocations that you've already made, and there's about 440 separate ones that are out there, we propose, and we have language for you on this, that proposes that toward the end of the year, sometime this fall, we will, from our agencies, get information about what's likely to get out the door, get obligated by the end of the year. And if it's not going to make it, we will aggregate it at OPM. We'll give notice to the legislature what the amount is and what those accounts were. And then we will, subject to whatever you put in the ultimate act this year, we've got a proposal for you. We will put it somewhere where it can be dispersed quickly so that we don't have to send this money back. So we'll be talking to you about that. I think our underlying implementer suggests something around housing or homelessness. Another idea is the unemployment insurance fund. That's a quick way to disperse a large amount of money. It would be consumed right away. That brings us to our conclusion. A budget proposal is balanced, complies with all constitutional and statutory fiscal guardrails.
We
continue-
hear you, Jeff.
Yes,
We
ma'am.
got it. You don't need to say it. We
Okay.
say it. We hear it all the time. We get it.
What was he gonna say?
He was going on, he just talks on and on about, we're following the guide rails. Don't worry about it. You guys are doing good. Don't
It's
worry,
almost a
blah, blah,
political
blah.
speech,
It is.
which you've never heard before.
Yeah, yes, we got it. I'm gonna kick it off and we're gonna do the normal 2-question things, but Jeff, we did talk about this a little bit on the ARPA. I don't think that anybody in the legislature is gonna give a free hand. We didn't give you a free hand on spending the ARPA. We are not going to give you a free hand to reallocate those dollars, so I wouldn't count on that.
I want your
Appreciate
direction. I
that
want your direction as to where.
Direction and approval.
Yeah, but it's got to be someplace that it can go quickly. It can't
Direct,
be another
I
laundry
get
list of
it,
places that'll
direction
take forever.
and approval. The legislature will maintain the control over the ARPA.
With
Just
you.
wanted to say that out loud. That's my first point. And and I have a few, but I'm gonna stick to 2. But I did notice that you cut the American School for the Deaf by $800,000, and that is not listed anywhere. And I'm just curious, what is the reason for taking money out of the American School for the Deaf?
Well, it's not taking money out. It's flat funding. They're getting the same amount they got in fiscal 24. There were a number of places where
But we had money in it in fiscal
did.
25, so you cut fiscal 25 by $800,000 when that organization who handles a group of people that we have really deprioritized in the state. We have deprioritized services for deaf people, and this was to build that organization, which the last time I checked, and I checked last year, many of the people were many of the young people that go to the American School for the Deaf are people who live here in Connecticut. And they really needed the resources there to build it back up. So it is a cut. And it is a cut out of the budget, and I recognize the number of cuts, but I just wanted to say that that's something that I find is not necessarily a good cut, but it's not recognized. And are there other cuts in this budget that are not recognized from fiscal 25 that is not in one of the sheets that you did?
Well, it's not in the PowerPoint. It's a high level PowerPoint, but it's all of it's in the budget book and all of it's detailed
Okay.
online.
I just wanted
It's
to
all
make sure
there.
everything
Absolutely.
every cut that you made is
Yes.
in the budget. Thank
Yes,
you.
but where we flat fund something, we're not deprioritizing it. I don't
We have,
deprioritize that.
but we
school.
have deprioritized the deaf community. Time and time again, since 2017, we got rid of the Office of Protection and Advocacy. We got rid of an ombudsman and a group in ADS that handled helped handle the deaf community and pointed them into services. We had cut the money that was going to the American School for the Deaf. This was starting to return it to that. So it's a deprioritizing of a group of people that we don't have classes anymore for interpreters. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on the things that we have deprioritized as a state for the deaf community. And so, I'll stick with my interpretation of deprioritizing the services for the deaf community. Representative Walker.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, sorry, Mr. Secretary, for your presentation. I'm going to go right into the ARPA allocations. How much money do we have in ARPA available now that has not been spent or paid out?
So we got about $2.8 billion from the federal government originally.
Hmm.
We've identified 56 million that we are proposing reallocations for in these adjustments. I just went through those for you. We've got a spreadsheet on what those were, where we've got the money from and where we propose that it goes. All of our agencies are working to get all of the allocations out the door this year. And if we talk to them today, they would presumably tell us they're working hard to get all of them out. We won't know until we get closer to the end of the year, what's the probability of getting that allocation out or not, or how much of it can we get out by the end of the year? That's why we propose that as we get closer to that, they tell us and we aggregate it and we tell you about it, tell where it's coming from, get it all in one tranche, and then put it somewhere which you can tell us where you want it to go. But it's got to go somewhere quickly by the end of the year. It can't be another list of things where we have to go and negotiate contracts with people. It's got to be something that we do quickly. So 56 we're recognizing here. We're proposing that you reallocate it as we've suggested. That's the amount we've identified to date, but we think it could be a larger number by the end of the year. I just don't know what that is yet.
Having gone through the negotiations with the ARPA over the last couple of years as we tried to spend it out, there have been a lot of pitfalls. One, because we did not understand the contracting. Two, because we didn't have enough staff to process the contracting. Three, because of the agencies that we had allocated the money to, because there were a lot of the unauthorized or unpaid out accounts, a lot of them are legislative intents. And so when talking about the earnestness of trying to get these out, we have to come to an agreement about what we mean by earnest. Because I have, with our office and with many of my colleagues, had a lot of frustration and anger for the lack of effort that has been put to funding the programs. So going forward, many of the dollars that are not spent were not because we did not want them done, because the recipients didn't want them, but for our experiences. So how do we know from this day going forward the timelines? We have to set a timeline for things to get completed. We have to be very clear about what we need to be completed. And if we don't have the staff to do it, we have to be told so that we can get that done. So I have I do not believe a lot of the things that we've got here are honestly programs that we're not wanting to receive the funding, or we're not focused on trying to acquire the funding. You have a puzzled look on your face.
I'm trying to follow you.
Okay. I'm trying to be nice, okay? I may not if I can keep going. I don't think the sincerity of trying to get the money out the door to the people that we wanted directed to was really an effort from everybody's part. Not all of them, but many of them.
Well, I have to take issue with that. The federal rules were complicated, and the
Yes.
federal rules require a lot of reporting that some of our community providers aren't familiar with, and there's a reluctance to sign up for some of that. So there has been reluctance on the recipient side to take this federal money because of all the reporting requirements. They don't have at the contractor level the sophistication to deal with all that. So we've had some difficulty getting them comfortable with it for those who are willing to go forward and comply with all those federal rules. That's taken a little while. There's been no unwillingness to move the money. We want to move the money. I don't want to give it back. I want to spend it. It was given to us for the pandemic for various purposes. We want to use it in our state. Why would we want to send that back? No one wants to do that. So to the extent that there are issues remaining in getting the money out the door, we're absolutely committed to making sure that we do that. We just know, because we keep hearing there are some vendors who don't talk to us. They don't return our calls.
Mhm.
They're not set up to do this work.
Mhm.
So it was designated for them, but they just can't do it. We've had legislators call us and say, yeah, this vendor's not going to be able to spend that money. So
Mhm.
there's a range of reasons why this hasn't yet happened. Happy to work with you on making sure we do everything we can to get everything that's been allocated out the door. But if we can't, we want to partner with you in figuring out, okay, where does it go now? If we can't get it out the
Okay.
door.
So one of the things that I will say that I heard was that we had to, the agencies that were going to get the money had to spend the money first and then get reimbursement. That was not part of what we were told when we were doing this. And I don't, I can vouch that.
I'll look into that.
Okay. But
That's
I
news to
just want
me.
to make it clear, the agencies don't have to spend the money ahead of time in order to acquire the funding from the state. Is that correct?
That would be news to me if that were a requirement of the ARPA funding, but I'm happy to explore that.
Fascinating. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I look forward to working with you on the ground rules that we will work with going forward. Thank you.
Tammy, Representative Zawistowski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Secretary, and also for your support of the fiscal guardrails.
That's the governor. That's not me.
Well, you're the spokesman for the governor here, so anyway, the budget adjustment is showing 521 new employees. Is that all actually new hires, or does that reflect some transfers? I know there's some budgeted transfers into DAS. Where is that?
We don't
you
have
figure-
that many new positions. The position count changes all the time based on what's filled, what's vacant, that sort of thing, whether they need all of they've been approved for up to date. So we update that position account every year, but that's not 521 new positions around the state.
Okay, because yeah, the budget adjustment is showing that. So as we get through the subcommittee process, I think we can narrow that down a little bit. Second question, do you think the paid family leave agency, they're currently at 40 employees. Are these folks covered by the controller for fringe benefits? And do you expect any growth in that agency? I mean, they have a huge surplus, and is any consideration? Is any consideration?
RSA doesn't cover them. They are an
They
independent quasi.
Do not, okay.
Yeah, the fund that they administer covers all their costs.
Okay, do you expect any growth in the employees in that agency?
I'm not aware of any growth there.
Okay, because they've got a huge balance at this point, and is there any consideration given to reducing the payroll tax?
Well, they're new and they've been paying these benefits out only for a short time. So before we cut their resources, I'd like to see what their experience is going to be over the next little while and make sure they don't need all of that for the payout of the benefits.
Yeah, but they're showing a $700 million surplus at this point. So I'm
Heard that.
hoping that we can have a conversation at that time when we have a little bit more track record.
Yes,
Great.
happy to have that.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Up next is Senator Lesser, followed by Senator Winfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Secretary. Good to see you. If there was a consensus on anything last year, it was on the need to raise Medicaid rates for the first time since 2007 and through House Bill 5001 on expansion of Husky C. This budget actually cuts Husky A, B, and C, and in the case of the Husky C cuts beyond the levels appropriated in the budget, won't that lead to higher spend downs and therefore more medical debt for the elderly and people with disabilities, and we're improving the budget?
We're not cutting Medicaid. We're not proposing any changes to the dollar figures for Husky C. There was a dollar figure provided, and we've got some implementer language which we believe corrects where that should be based on the amount of money appropriated for it. So we're not cutting the money. We're just making sure the implementer language covers what was agreed to and what was anticipated and what that number is based on. The Husky A maneuver, which I explained earlier, is keeping those same folks covered. We are saving money in Medicaid, but we're keeping those folks covered on Covered Connecticut. As far as the rates, we have studies underway. It's a two-phase study. You've already, I think, gotten a written report of the first phase.
We have not.
Well, I think it's coming soon. I think you're going to get a briefing next week on that. That is just the first phase. There's going to be another phase of the Medicaid rate studies coming in later this year and or early next. We want to take a look at the entirety of that universe of rates and providers under Medicaid to make sure we're addressing the ones who have the most acute need. We can't do it piecemeal. We can't do it, ad hoc. We need to look at the whole thing. So we'd like to have those rate studies complete. There is money in the budget, about $7 million in 25 to begin to address some of the most acute ones that we do know about. But we need to make sure that we have a comprehensive, holistic view of that before we commit resources. As we all know, it's a big dollar item. It will crowd out quite a lot of spending in other areas if we're not careful. So we have to be careful with how we spend that money going forward.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mr. Secretary. And with respect to the Medicaid rates, the question, we all knew that the $7 million for the generalized increase and then the partial increases for ambulances and other services were not enough. And so the question was, how much more money would the governor put forward in this year's budget to meet the needs that are out there? As was, I think, alluded to, the administration has so far not met the statutory deadline for that rate increase, and I see no increased dollars at all for that. In fact, as I think you mentioned, we've seen a cut to the proposed Medicaid rates, with regard to ambulances and the other areas in the budget. So rather than take a step forward and provide more funding to implement the study that we don't yet have, we see a cut to that. So when is the governor going to come with funding to implement the Medicaid rate study? When are we going to have that in front of us?
We will address what we perceive to be the needs there when we have all of the information available, when the studies are complete.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Senator Winfield, followed by Representative Chalinsky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Mr. Secretary. I have a lot of questions, and I'm particularly focused on higher education, but something the governor said yesterday put my focus back on one of the things that is really important to me, and that's the Social Equity Council. I believe in his speech, he said that we were going to have a focus on childcare and homeless shelters. And that makes me wonder about what we are doing with the Social Equity Council. As person who authored the Social Equity Council, spoke about what we were trying to do. I'm trying to figure out, one, what we're talking about in terms of dollars towards these efforts, and two, and if you know what kind of thought we have, because we were talking about doing things that are not things we would normally be doing in the budget to help these communities. It's why we painstakingly defined what those communities were. It's why we laid out the types of things that we would be doing: access to capital for businesses in those communities, access to technical assistance, community reinvestments of a certain type, workforce training. And when I hear us talking about childcare and homelessness and those types of things, which are things we should be doing that belong in the budget itself, it sounds like the Social Equity Council's focus is not the focus that I intended when I came up with the concept of the Social Equity Council. Is not what we explained. It is wholly different. So if you could talk a little bit about what kind of dollars we're talking about and what the thought is there. And I'll just add this piece to it. I'm also concerned about the positions that are associated with the Social Equity Council, not just DECD, but there are other positions that look like they're associated with the Social Equity Council or maybe are funded. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. The governor was talking about the commitments we were making in the general fund on childcare and other items that it was his hope and belief that the SEC, the Social Equity Council, was also addressing. They have some resources available in those areas that were most impacted by the war on drugs. And we're aware that they have some resources available to them that they can likewise. He was talking about that as a supplement to what we were doing in the general fund. So that was a suggestion to the SEC, the council, to begin to supplement and assist the general fund in some of those areas. They have, I think it's something like 40 million or so of the leftover startup costs, the startup fees that when we legalized recreational use a year or so ago, that they still have available to spend. And as you're quite right, the idea there was, I think we were going to try to do business development and try and give technical assistance and training to folks who were getting into that industry, as well as other investments for job training, that sort of thing in those census tracts. There's an ongoing revenue from that industry to the state that the council has at its disposal to spend. But they are independent. I think we have a representative or two on it. And we're engaged with them on a regular basis to figure out how they're going to spend that money. I don't think they're that far along from my last report as to coming up with some specific proposals, but we look forward to those and we hope that they will look at things that will improve the lives of the folks who live in those census tracts.
Thank you. And I would just say to that, I hope that they adhere to what we created them for and are not there to supplement us because we haven't made other choices that we could make, like adjusting the guardrails. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Representative Chaleski, followed by Senator Anwar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the most pressing concerns that I've had in the budget is the acceleration of the ECS funding formula. So I'm glad to see that the governor is honoring the acceleration. It's important to note that these are districts, the districts that are now catching up with the full implementation of the ECS formula are districts that have been underfunded for many years. And to say that in your slide that fully funding at current statutory amount, I feel is misleading because the state has not met its obligations to these districts in a long time. And with that said, it's also important to note that towns serving predominantly low-income students already qualify for free school meals through the federal CEP program that enables the districts to provide free meals. So I'm looking at the OFA briefing where the governor has basically taken money from magnets, public charters, VOAGs, open choice.
Haven't taken any money. We increased what they were getting. There was no implementer language provided for those dollar amounts. So we're providing some implementer language that allows for magnets and open choice for it to increase by 3% per pupil.
So I'll rephrase. Decreasing the amount that was in the original budget that was passed for those programs that predominantly serve low-income students to then serve school meals to districts that don't necessarily need the support. And it's a noble goal to provide school meals for all students. I firmly believe that you cannot teach a hungry child, but the districts that serve the low income population are already receiving meals through the federal program. And also I hear from my colleagues about the amount of waste that happens. So,
yeah,
you know, why continue this policy knowing the amount of waste that happens in our schools? And while our most neediest districts are already taken care of.
You're asking about the universal free breakfast and reduced price meal subsidy?
I'm asking about the money allocated for school meals.
Yes. Well, the governor believes that that's an important policy innovation for us to make that available for the reasons you stated. We agree with you. It is noble and we should continue it.
And then I guess my second question for now, is there any new charter money in the governor's proposal, perhaps in any other budget line item?
No, I think we fully fund the ones that are out there at the statutory amount, and we've adjusted for enrollment. As you know, the governor does support charter schools, and if one came forward and had community support, we would obviously be looking to include that in the budget.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Anwar will be followed by Representative McCarty.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, I have a question. Thank you for mentioning about the increase in homelessness. And I just wanted to mention that when I look at page B44 in the budget, it says that there is a only $500,000 increase in the budget. And then last year we put in 5 million some dollars. I'm just trying to clarify, is that the only increase of 500,000 for homelessness for the state this year?
We retain all of this. We haven't cut anything from the budget on that. You're on B44, you say?
Correct.
Yes. I see. Most of the homeless initiatives that were spotlighted in our slideshow are in Demas. They're not in housing. This is you're only looking at the increase in housing. If you find the Demas page, you can summarize the items that we had in our PowerPoint, which is B54, I'm told.
So some of the solutions that you're looking at or investments are more on the Demas side, not on the
That's right.
housing side. Okay. We'll look at this and we'll probably have to have a conversation because we are losing ground on this important issue. The second question I wanted to ask was, as I look at the DDS and also Health and Human Services support in, I believe, B59, there's rightfully an increase for providers of about 7% or so, but the rest of the health and human services providers, they are providing literally life-saving addiction management services, and the cost is increasing and the needs are increasing there as well. And there's only a 2.5% increase that at least I can see. What is the long-term plan? Because this is not going to be enough.
Long-term plan for?
Well, for providers who are taking care of the individuals impacted by the opioid crisis.
Yeah. Well, there are multiple, you mentioned the opioids. Obviously, that's a separate settlement tranche that there's a committee set up to disperse those funds. I know they're making available funds to vendors for that, private providers for that. The private provider network universally has come in for increases in the recent years. We've had about 4 years of increases for nonprofit providers, including in the underlying budget. We rolled forward an extra $50 million that was provided last year. We built that into the budget going forward. So that's going to continue to annualize those increases. They're up, I think it's about 13.5% over the last 4 years in terms of total funding for nonprofit providers. But they're an important part of our human services network, health and human services network, and we have to continue to see what we can do there to increase that, continue that progress to make sure they're properly compensated.
We'll probably talk offline because the numbers may not be enough. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Up next is Representative McCarty, followed by Senator Summers, who is online. Representative McCarty.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and welcome, Secretary. Thank you for your presentation today. So I'll begin by saying how delighted we are to see that education has been a high priority within the state recently, and we need to continue that willingness to provide the education dollars that are necessary. But I'm concerned when I look at last year, we had the $150 million that was dedicated to going out to our districts to increase the ECS, to do all those things which we talked about today. But I am concerned because I'm looking at that funding. We have a lot of demands in the state. Early childcare is one of them, and very pleased to see what was outlined in the adjustment with the governor's direction for early childcare. But can you explain to me, for my clarification, of that $150 million, is some of that money being diverted out of that original adjustment over to early childcare? And could you explain, I'd like to see a breakdown of where that $150 million, because it looks like when you look at the budget that some of that money is being re-diverted. If you could just begin with that. I do have a number of questions on education, but I'll begin with that one.
Yeah. So slide 13 was our attempt to break that down for you, and we may have done so inartfully or not as effectively as we could have. But on slide 13, you can see how we treated all of those line items that were in that reform item last year. Where there was not implementer language that gave us direction on how to spend it, we're providing some. And the description of where we land with that is there on slide 13. The ECS portion, we actually increase it. We've actually added 6 million to the ECS portion. So not only did we honor the acceleration, we added to it to update it for expenses that we've come aware of since then. For charters, magnets, open choice, and VOAG, we're fully funding those. We're actually increasing the amount going to magnets and open choice based on from 24 to 25. The savings that we're making there was not new resources for classrooms. It was simply a capping of the magnet school tuition from the sending districts. It was relieving them of 42% of the magnet school tuition, and the state was going to pick that up. That wasn't providing any new teachers, any raises to anyone, any new magnet slots, any new resources for the classroom. It was just municipal aid masquerading as education reform. So we think we should save that money and use it in the general fund on education and other things that you presumably agree we should spend money on.
Well, thank you for the answer, but I'd like to continue that
Sure.
conversation at another time. I would like to also just ask the question about the special ed excess costs in the budget, and to ensure that the state meets its obligation to fully fund. As you know, we have an increase in special education costs. If you could just comment on that, please.
We don't have a new proposal on special education costs, excess costs. You're quite right. That is an area of acute need. We probably need to do more there. I'm happy to have a conversation about how we can do that. Whether we can do so depends on fitting it into a balanced budget that complies with all caps, but happy to have that conversation.
I appreciate that. I have a few more, but I'll hold off. Thank you.
We appreciate you sticking to the 2 questions instead of trying to add on. Senator Summers had her hand up earlier. I don't know if she had to get off. Up next then is Representative Felipe, followed by Representative Valinsky.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome, Mr. Secretary. Glad to have you back. Last year we had a conversation about baby bonds, and the gist of that conversation, right? Because baby bonds, I want to thank the administration. I want to thank Treasurer Russell. I want to thank former Treasurer Wooden and the BPRC for the work we did on that. But the conversation that we had, at least the way that I presented it, had to do with legislative intent, right? There's 187 of us that serve together, and we rest our heads in different parts of the state, and we wake up in different parts of the state, and we have all these different needs, right? And you were just speaking on the $50 million cut to the $150 million that we had added in education last year. To me, that is the same thing. We heard in the governor's speech yesterday, I think 7 times, about investment in ECS, investment in ECS, investment in ECS. And I understand that on its face, of course, that's exactly what it is, because that $150 million technically was not ECS. But what we were doing was trying to make sure that we were making those same investments we were trying to make in ECS. And actually, the first ask that we made was double the amount of money that we put into the budget. Then our intent as a legislature for year 25, I understand that folks are saying that they're not cuts because the money hasn't been spent yet. What we intended, what we put out to our constituencies, what we let everybody know we were looking to do, that's a beacon to them. That's saying, hey, we're looking out for you. We're trying to do these things for you. And I'm come from one of those districts. I lay my head in a district that is in tremendous need when it comes to that education money. So for us to go down to 50% and then cut 30% on top of it, we're giving people 1/3 of I won't even say what we asked for, 1/3 of what they need. And I understand you just said it a few minutes ago that you think it's municipal aid masquerading as education reform. No, it's the way that we had to figure out to do education reform because of the way negotiations went, because of the way that we were working together. Like, we wanted to make sure this is a way that we could make it work. We worked with you. We worked hard to make sure we can get just that amount of money. And to me, it's just a little bit of, I don't think disrespect is the right word, but it's not looking at legislative intent with the proper reverence, right? We have to signal to our constituencies. We cannot say the same way that the governor is saying that these are increases, because they don't believe us. They will not look at us and go to the ballot box feeling good about what we have done. So my question is, when looking at that $48 million, was there a thought of maybe cutting somewhere else? Like, why exactly was that fund the one to cut?
We did not think that was an advisable policy for the state to go forward with. As I indicated, it would be a permanent liability to the state. It would represent accelerating, increasing costs over time. Those school operators would not know that they could get that from the state every year. What we do every year depends on where the budget lands. The sending districts have to pay that now. They're not, they can rely on that, the school operators. That 48 million didn't buy anything in your district that's not already there. Wasn't buying you anything new. You weren't getting new teachers, new slots. No one was getting a raise. The same stuff that you're getting was just going to be paid by the state. That's not new resources to the classroom. So we honored all of the acceleration money. We actually added money for the updated information in the ECS line. And we are increasing the spending on magnets and charters by 3% per pupil.
Yeah, having worked tremendously hard on that, I think that is a very, very, that is a big misinterpretation of what we intended to do, what we did do. But I will not continue on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Bolinsky, followed by Representative Reyes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Beckham, I wanted to, like Representative Zalsowski, I wanted to just say thank you to the governor and to you for the state's commitment to the fiscal guardrails, and it's important, and I like the way the world is viewing us. It's a nice change. A lot of the issues around the guardrails, play out in public, and I just want to hear you and ask you to comment on whether these guardrails are actually the handcuffs they're being portrayed as being by some people, or if they are indeed, and how they are indeed adjusted upward. Is that by CPI? Is that by rate of inflation, or is that not at all? So it's important for everybody to know that that as we talk about sustainable budgets, they're not necessarily fixed.
Yes, you're right. The elements of the guardrails do increase over time. The spending cap itself goes up every year, either by the greater of inflation or the increase in personal income. In fiscal year 25, it's the growth in personal income is higher than inflation, which is a good place to be. I think everyone agrees. You want personal income growing faster than inflation, and sure enough, it is, not by a lot, but it is a higher number next year. So for the spending cap alone, the growth in personal income represents, I like to think of it as the taxpayer's ability to pay, right? So we're getting an increase in our personal income. If you want to go past the spending cap guardrail, you're advocating spending money faster than our taxpayers can make it. So I think that's an important guardrail to adhere to. The volatility cap increases over time. The threshold for it increases over time. I forget the exact metric for it, but it's up, I think, another 600 or 700 million since it was enacted. It's personal income growth, I'm told. So that much more money is actually going to the general fund, not going to volatility since it was enacted. It does grow over time, that threshold. There may come a time in the not too distant future when that threshold goes up so much that we don't get a volatility cap deposit. It's all going to go to the general fund. So that's always increasing the volatility cap piece. So they are flexible in that way. Obviously, they're flexible by their terms, both in the Constitution and in the statute. The governor can declare an emergency by a supermajority. We can exceed the caps. If we have an economic downturn, I'm sure we will consider that. We had to take extraordinary measures 15 years ago. It wasn't just a rainy day, it was a hurricane. And for those who were here, it was a very difficult time. We had a very slow decade of recovery from that. We cut a lot of spending. We raised a lot of taxes. Fortunately, the federal government gave us a bunch of money. But even on top of that, we had to borrow money. We had to borrow more than $2 billion in economic recovery notes that it took about 10 years to pay off. That's what happens when you don't have a built-in system of fiscal guardrails. So as I said, we have sister states around the country who are experiencing significant financial difficulties. They are cutting spending and raising taxes, but not here.
Thank you very much for that. That's important to hear. And I was here for the hurricane, and $2 billion worth of, spent, bonding and all that. And I got to say that this is a better thing for our taxpayers. So thank you so much for that. Just, you know what? I'm gonna skip my second question because I was a little bit long on the first one, and maybe I'll come
Thank
back
you. I
for a
appreciate
second
that.
bite.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Madam Chair.
Representative Reyes, if you wouldn't mind holding on for 1 second, Representative Haddad has to go to a meeting. So Representative Haddad, and then you'll be following Representative Haddad. Thank you.
Thank you for the accommodation. I appreciate that. Our committee starts in 15 minutes, and but I am going to turn attention to higher education, as you might expect from me. I've been struggling here trying to think of what the right question is to ask, frankly, because last year we spoke extensively about the suggestions that you made in the state budget for higher education to achieve, to make meet its budget. Last year, some of the suggestions that we talked about that you had suggested were decreasing the number of staff and faculty at universities, increasing tuition on students, lowering the number of slots available to Connecticut students at places like the University of Connecticut. And we see that vision really being realized in real time now. Students at the community colleges will pay $246 more this year than last year. At the CSUs, over $1,100. At UConn, over $1,200. And over the lifetime of their degree, that's substantial increases. We see 1,800, UConn's on a path to have 1,800 fewer slots for Connecticut students than prior to these budget recommendations. And additionally, the number of staff and faculty are decreasing, making it more and more difficult for students to access services and the level of courses that they depend on. And still, after implementing all of those cuts, the universities and colleges say that they are somewhere around between $100 and $150 million short. When I turn to the budget pages, though, I see this. It says, no adjustments to enacted budget are proposed. So I'm kind of stunned and disappointed. We have a crisis. It's being reported in the papers. It's being reported to us by our constituents. And this administration has no plan to address that concern. There's executive branch agencies are saying they are $100 million in deficit, and you offer no solutions in your budget. So my question is why? Why not?
Well, we do offer solutions where we believe that they would be where there's a solution required. The universities, both systems are working on their issues, and we're working with them. We're talking to them early and often. They are implementing the budget that was enacted last year with an overwhelming bipartisan majority. We don't happen to have operational resources that we are recommending to them. We are, however, in the underlying budget, have $309 million of capital authorizations that are available to them. We're adding to those with 90 million more for UConn. So we've been working with them on their capital side. They have some work to do on the operating side. And for the reasons we put out in our budget narrative last year, we did not insist on any of those items that you listed. We noted that they had those as options, as levers they could pull. We took on the fringe rate, the pension liability off the both systems. That's now on the general fund, relieved them of that. They told us for a decade or more that, but for that, they'd be in the black. They wouldn't need more ever increasing state support. Well, we did that. And it turns out they still have needs. At some point, they need to sharpen their pencil. They've got a structural problem in both systems that they need to address. Before I took this job, I was not a regular reader of the Chronicle of Higher Education, but I get it sent to me now with some regularity. A couple weeks back, it noted flagship universities around the country are experiencing exactly the same thing. We're not an outlier here. All states are looking at their universities to make sure that they're adding value for the taxpayers, doing so in an efficient way, and doing so in a reasonable level of state support. UConn and relies on state support to a much greater degree than most of their peers around the country. They're in probably the bottom 20% in that regard. They're also, as I pointed out last year, and happy to do so again, a bit of an outlier in terms of their faculty to student ratio compared to their peers around the country. All we're asking is that there's some levers they clearly can move there to get some of their structural issues under control. And they're doing that. I talk to President Merrick all the time, and she's working hard to do that. I know they have an additional ask on the operating side, but they're implementing their current budget, the budget we all agreed to 8 months ago. The General Assembly in its wisdom wants to do something else there. We're happy to talk about that, but it's, as I answered another question before, it'll have to be within a budget that's balanced and compliant with all the caps.
So just to be clear, the institutions and the systems have indicated to you that they continue to be in deficit after tuition increases, staff and faculty reductions, and a change in the mix of students. And I guess what I just heard from you is you guys think that more of that is where they should go. I tend to disagree. Yesterday during the governor's speech, he said that the level of funding provided to higher education is the largest commitment ever to higher education. And I just want to correct the record. I mean, that's demonstrably untrue. I have, spreadsheets now, and they're still working on them, admittedly, from our own Office of Fiscal Analysis that show that, state support for public higher education in Connecticut was higher 15 years ago in real dollars than it is today. That's true for UConn, the state universities, and the community college system. The State Higher Education Executive Officers Association compiles data over time, and they show that the percent of state support to the public institutions in Connecticut has been in decline for a decade or more. And even when you adjust for, even per pupil student appropriations over time have declined when adjusted for inflation. And so, your response, I think, will just be small solace to students who are paying, close to $5,000 more for a degree at our flagship university, or, community college students who simply are going to find it increasingly unaffordable to go even to community college in Connecticut, because we're withdrawing, continue to not keep pace with inflation. I would ask you this as a final question. We have a public hearing, as you know, on February 20th. This room will be filled with faculty and staff and advocates for public higher education. We will be here listening to their testimony. I will keep a seat open for you, and I would ask that you come here and listen to that testimony personally. And additionally, I hope that we can find, as the architect of this, the budget, I hope that we can find some time in our subcommittee to have OPM come in and have a real robust conversation about where we are with funding for higher education. We do that with the institutions. We are oftentimes in agreement with them about where we should go with the budget. Where we are in disagreement is with you, and so I would invite you to come to our subcommittee and have that conversation there as well.
I'll do that.
Up next is Representative Reyes, followed by Representative Harrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Morning, Mr. Secretary. Senator Anwar is started the track on which I'm going to go down. I'm very, very concerned and very interested in the dilemma, the crisis, I'm going to call it, in the state of Connecticut and the nation on the housing situation. And I think that I think I heard the governor mention housing and housing shortage and the dilemma with evictions and so forth several times. And my thought is that in a crisis, I think you have to move the funds to where the actual crisis is. And I think that this budget that I see here isn't addressing what we call a crisis. And my question to you would be, why can't we move more money to this now while we're facing the highest evictions ever in the state of Connecticut?
Well, we start with the issue of supply. We don't have enough housing for workforce, for affordable housing. The governor, I don't have it in this slide because it's on the capital side, but you probably know that the average amount of new authorizations for housing on the capital side has been about 150 million over the last 5 years. In this biennium, it's 430 million in each year. So over $800 million of new authorizations the governor's committed to being part of the capital stack to get more housing built. More supply would go a long way to helping with these issues. It's been a signature issue of his second term. He cares very much about this issue. Agrees with you. We need to do more on housing, and we're absolutely doing so on the capital side. I know we've added resources both at Department of Housing and DEMIS on the homeless issue. So we quite agree. This is an area that is of acute need, and we're happy to work with you if this mix of resources isn't as effective as it might be. Happy to talk about how we could do so.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I think that's an important conversation that we must continue to have, because I think at this point right now, not every community is seeing the dire need that I'm seeing. I happen to represent a very poor district, so I have a huge concern when it comes to the housing and the eviction situation. Second question is on the electric vehicles. We know that this is a necessary bill that's coming down the pike real quick, and we want to talk how we're going to be able to continue to support these environmental justice communities, these marginalized communities that, first of all, don't have that extra income for electric vehicles. And we put together a program. Right now, there's only $8 million in the cheaper rebate program for the electric vehicles. I won't even say there are caucuses, which I belong to several, and I'm going to tell you that most of us felt right off the onset that $8 million was a drop in the bucket. It wasn't going to be able to help sustain those communities. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Happy to continue that conversation. We don't have a proposal in our adjustments on that topic, but I know Commissioner Dykes is active on that issue of the environmental justice communities and trying to get resources to them for, things like urban planting and working on the special issues that our cities have with climate and environmental issues going forward. We are happy to look at the cheaper rebate program and see if there's some adjustments we could make there. Don't have a proposal for you today, but happy to talk to you about that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Harrison, followed by Representative Gilchrist.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here with us. My question is about some of the off-budget accounts. Is there a possible, or can you please supply to us the status of them? And more importantly, we know that these accounts get created and then sort of get lost or forgotten. So can you also provide, when was the last time that some of these were looked at? And if any of them are, no longer necessary, what are we doing about closing them out and turning the money back to perhaps the general fund?
That is a great question. We at OPM do not like off-budget accounts. Never have.
Agreed.
We always argue against them. We're a lonely voice in the wilderness on that. But there are some constituencies who want a guaranteed revenue stream for their program, and so sometimes that gets enacted. But you're absolutely right. It's very difficult to keep track. It's not part of our regular appropriations process. We know they're out there. We can get information from our agencies about them and make adjustments. There's several that I know we need to address probably in the next biennium because they're sinking funds. They don't have their revenues flat, but their costs are going up, and they're out there. There's a couple of them out there, and we do have to fix that in the long term. But we will get you that information. OFA can get you that information as well. They're well aware of those. Your own fiscal staff, they can give you up-to-date information as well.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I think I'd like to also continue on the vein of free school lunches. While I totally agree that, hungry children cannot learn, what I'm hearing across some of my, district is the amount of waste. So children who just don't like them aren't eating them, and the amount that's in the trash can. And that concerns me because we're continuing to fund this and believe me, I do believe we should fund to those who need it. My concern is that we're just blanketly funding a program and wasting money that we could put into other streams in the education process and for some of the other things that we need. So it's my comment. It's not a question. And it's certainly something I'd like us to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. I just I have to step out for a minute, and there were two things that I wanted to say, but Representative Harrison brought up one thing. When we have off-budget accounts like the Passport to Parks was established because all of the parks in Eastern Connecticut were being closed down. That's the ones that were being closed down. There was nothing else, and there was no interest to be able to fund those parks. So we had closed parks all over Eastern Connecticut, which seems to be a habit of many things when we have things in Eastern Connecticut like Shoreline East, like the fact that Chaffa has targeted all three counties in Eastern Connecticut to not get competitive tax credits for housing, and then we're told that we don't have any housing. It's fine to say that these off-budget accounts shouldn't exist, but when you don't fund anything and you target a whole third of the state in policy after policy after policy, it is the only way that we get funding. The only way. And when Melissa Zevron was a state representative, she and I worked on Passport to Parks. It was never the intention to fund all of the fringe benefits. That was never the intention. And that's what we're doing now. And that's what that is what's causing that fund to sink. And that is something that I tried to address last year and was not allowed to address by a request of the administration. So we cannot any longer continue to target a third of the state and say, you can't have housing, but you should build your own housing. You can't have public transportation because we're going to close down Shoreline East. You can't have parks, but we're going to keep those parks open, but you can't use them. Time and time and time again. And I am sick of hearing that we should do everything for every other part of the state, which I always have supported, but I am no longer going to sit silent when we don't want to fund the parts of Eastern Connecticut any longer. Representative Gilchrist, it's your turn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello, Secretary.
Hello.
My question has to do with, I have two, but the first with the DDS
Uh-huh.
budget. There's a mention that there is a $7 million cut to reflect the impact of lower utilization of wage increases. And the write-up says that the savings result from lower than budgeted need for wage increases. Concerned, surprised by this, considering the conversations I'm having with folks in the IDD community, is that there's such a workforce shortage. And it's in large part because of low wages that's causing turnover, which is having a number of impacts. Additionally, it was my understanding that the 2022 budget implementer had language directing any extra wage money be distributed to providers. So just if you could clarify how that $7 million cut was reached.
Yeah. The wages were increased. We're not cutting the wages. It is utilization. It is, we programmed in the number, a higher utilization caseload assumption, and it hasn't shown up. We expected it to come back to pre-pandemic levels, and it hasn't. They're just not as many folks coming forward who need the services or signing up for those services.
I look forward to diving deeper into that in the subcommittee because I
Sure.
find that
I'm sure,
hard to believe.
Yeah, DDS at their subcommittee can give you details there.
Okay, great. And then my second question, back to what was already discussed with regards to the childhood vaccines and the 14.2 million proposed savings there. So vaccines, as you already know, have expiration dates. Just wondering if there's a monitoring process of the existing stock so that vaccines are used and they don't expire.
That's on advice of the Department of Public Health, and I hope and believe they would know that. And but you can certainly explore that with them at the subcommittee.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next we have Senator Flexer, followed by Representative Datham.
Oh, I see.
Oh, no? Oh, okay. Oh, not yet? Okay, okay. Okay. Representative Datham.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Secretary, for your presentation this morning. Really helpful. Mine's questions is along the same route as Representative Gilchrist. We worked really hard on 5001 last year. We just received a report in January with the status of the wait list. And it was great to see that some of the folks on the DDS wait list have come down, but actually on the autism wait list, people have gone up. I have concerns when you talk about that the needs aren't there when our wait list is really high. We have 53 million that has gone out from OPM on private providers. I understand that that's going to additional state agencies. But along the same sort of lines as Representative Haddad, when it comes to higher ed, we see, higher needs for higher wages, cost of increase, but yet we're not funding our private providers or nonprofit safety net that we have been saying time and time again are taking the weight off of our government and making sure that we can provide those services. So I'd like to get an understanding of why our wait lists have not gone down and we're lapsing funds and we're reducing funds in the future budget.
So the issue at DDS with the wait list is an issue of staffing. The vendors, the contractors the private providers doing that work have had trouble staffing up. It's historically tight labor market. A lot of folks have jobs, have their pick of jobs in this labor market. As well, our real estate market in Connecticut is making it difficult, as well as other issues locally, to site facilities that would serve that population. As you know, that's an ongoing issue in places. So it's those two difficulties that are the principal reasons why DDS hasn't has a need for that money, because they're not able to actually provide the service without the staffing and without the siting of those facilities. With regard to the private providers generally, I'll just refer you to my remarks earlier. We rolled that extra money into the bottom line. We didn't treat it as a bonus one time. We're going to honor it going forward, going to annualize those increases. They've had 13.5% over the last 4 years, and we do honor that going forward. If we were to do more there, happy to talk to you about that. But again, we have to fit that within a balanced budget that honors all the caps.
So are you referring to the moratorium from DDS on the CLAs?
I think DDS can probably give you a lot more detail at the subcommittee. I don't have extreme detail on that, but we're advised by them we could lapse that amount. It was due to a delay in programming because of the staffing issue, because of the siting issue, as well as lower utilization than was budgeted for. Okay.
Looking forward to diving into that a little bit more. My second question is really regarding in the Office of Early Childhood. We've increased funding there, but one of the regulations we're looking at within the Regulations Review Committee is actually changing the ratios from providers to from 4-to-1 to 6-to-1. And I have some concerns that we're not going to be able to adequately serve our youngest population with that ratio, and are these dollars going to help with that change in regulation?
Well, I'm not going to substitute my judgment for OECs in terms of what's the appropriate ratio. It strikes me that we'd be able to serve more people, though, if you move to that regulation that they're proposing. So that may be a good thing in terms of access and whether the quality, I'll defer to them on whether they think they can assure quality with that ratio. We are adding, as I point out, we're doubling actually the commitment to early childhood in fiscal 25. There was an underlying 50 million increase for early childhood. We're putting another 43, almost doubling the commitment. And as I indicated on the slide, since 2019, we've gone from a state line item of about 214 million for early childhood to over 400 million in the next fiscal year. It's an 88% increase. We've made a special effort to do as much as we can in the early childhood area. We're aware of the need. We're aware of the ask. We're aware of the Blue Ribbon Panel that in its 5th year was recommending an extra $636 million. I'll make the same observation I made to the press yesterday. If we're going to have big new investments in early childhood in the state, we really need the federal government to step up and do that. It was a big proposal for universal pre-K. It's been out there for many years. It didn't happen to make it when it was up for a vote 2 years ago in the Congress. Hopefully in the near term, we can get more funds out of the federal government and begin to make larger, more transformative investments in that area. All the data shows that investment at kids at that level yields enormous benefits to them later in life. So no one disputes that. We want to do more, doing everything we can within the confines of a balanced budget that stays within the caps.
That's great, but we also have to remember that more money is needed and everything like that. But if you're not servicing our youngest members with quality programming and you're just putting more strain on the system with providers that are making just above minimum wage and having to do more work, I have concerns that some of our communities are really going to suffer with not having those quality early childhood programming. So thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next, Representative Dillon, followed by Senator Gordon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, Secretary Beckham.
Good morning.
Thank you for your presentation. I guess I want to say that I think that Senator Austin's comments about investments in Eastern Connecticut are very helpful and instructive, because I have the same concerns about your administration's policy towards urban communities. So I guess I want to ask, since I heard you distinguish what you call legislative earmarks, and yet we have new spending from the governor in this budget and in the previous one, do you do an analysis or do you have anywhere a statement of what we would call urban social policy and the effect on urban communities of the spending you do and we do in different
I don't think I got all of that.
Yeah, Representative Dillon,
about
you
urban
kind of
social-
went in and out. And so you got your urban definition of urban policy and then you faded out. So you want to continue that really quickly?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just asking whether when you're making decisions about adding new spending or de-emphasizing other spending, do you do an analysis of its impact on certain communities? And do you have anywhere a paragraph that would be able to describe your administration's urban policy?
Representative Dillon, I would suggest that you turn off your camera just when you're talking, because I think that might help you in completing that. Mr. Secretary?
Well, let me take a stab at that. Didn't get all of it, but we do have about 30 pages at the beginning of this budget adjustment summary, the budget book. It's all online. There's a section that we have on equity that may go some way towards telling you what we do about that and how we address those issues in our budget. I commend that to you. It's fairly light reading, but it's the first several pages of your budget narrative, addressing a variety of issues facing urban communities as well as rural ones.
Representative Dillon?
Thank you. I would just suggest that there are a number of categories of spending here that we will discuss further in the hearings and in the subcommittee work that may disproportionately affect land all in one community or two or three. Let's say if you cut higher education and you remove positions at Southern, there are people losing their jobs. There are people paying more tuition here. That affects the local merchants. If we underfund the chronically mentally ill, I can find them in my park. The change to the guardrails in 2017 eliminated the deduction of spending in distressed municipalities. That was added because the original income tax that was authored by a Greenwich senator was a windfall for capital gains. So the other was added to sort of soften that because it didn't have the votes. All of these things affect certain communities. So it may look like there are discrete departments, but in fact, the spending may all land on some towns and not others. And I would urge you to think about what would mean for our conversations going forward and for your legacy. Thank you.
Happy to continue to work on those issues with you and with the committee.
Thank you. Senator Gordon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, nice to see you again.
Hello, Senator.
I'll preface my remarks by saying that I know you talk a lot about the spending cap and the fiscal guardrails, and I always welcome when you talk about that publicly. So I encourage you to talk about it more. I'm not going to rehash.
You're my senator. You can talk about it too.
Yes, and I do. And I do. That's right. You are a constituent, so I'm happy always to see you. I'm not going to rehash a lot of the questions that have already been here. There'll be other times in this committee to go through that, other than certainly we've heard a lot about the need to do what we can for public education in our municipalities, including, as we've heard, special education. We've heard about UConn, we've heard about CSCU, and a number of other things. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions. I have many of them, but I can take that offline, and happy to talk with you about some of my more detailed questions. One question I have, and I just want to seek a clarification of this. In the proposal, when we talk about VOAG schools, is there a proposed decrease or cut?
No.
I just want to make certain I'm clear on that, because they do
There's
very
no-
good work and they need the funding.
I agree, and they get it. They're fully funded at the statutory amount with the amount provided in our budget adjustment.
But is it less than anything that has otherwise been proposed in the biennium budget?
There was no legal authority to spend anything more than what's legally. They didn't change the statute, which prescribes how much we spend, and we provide the number that spends that amount.
Okay, thank you. And then one other question I have is, when it comes to money that's supposed to go to the Tobacco and Health Trust Fund, and I'm wearing two hats here when I ask that. One is as a senator, and the other is I'm a doctor, especially someone who takes care of people who have cancer, and there are a lot of cancers caused by tobacco, unfortunately. Why is it that there's going to be, I guess it's called the suspension of money going to that fund, when that fund actually has a purpose and serves a need, especially a preventative healthcare need for people, especially dealing with trying to not have kids take up tobacco in various forms?
That point's well taken. If that's, I haven't seen the recent allocation plan. It's the first allocation plan of this board since it was reconstituted. It's been out of business for almost a decade, I think. To the extent that it does that, I quite agree. But they have $24 million available to them. This board took a while getting stood up. They recently got stood up. They've got an existing $12 million that they have a new plan for to allocate the spending. They'll get another $12 million this April. So they'll have $24 million to spend over the biennium. We're simply recommending that in fiscal 25, given there was a delay in spending the first 12, they've got a backlog here of about 24 to spend. So we can pause the $12 million transfer from the general fund in 25, keep that in the general fund to spend on other programming, including health issues.
Thank you for the answer. And just one last comment I'll make, and then I'll be all set for now, Madam Chairwoman, is we heard Senator Austin loud and clear about Eastern Connecticut. As you know, I represent 13 towns in Northeastern Connecticut.
And as you know, I live in Eastern Connecticut.
Yes.
And I would never cut the parks in Eastern Connecticut.
So I just
That wasn't
want,
on my watch.
and I'm not blaming you for that. I just want to highlight that when we talk about equity relative to all different things that go on in the state, and as you well know, it's a lot of hardworking, good people, families in Eastern and Northeastern Connecticut, and I just want to continue to make certain we're advocating for them. We may be the quiet corner of the state, but we are a part of the state that very much has a lot of needs and a lot of people who have needs, and you'll continue to hear from all of us, as you already have been, about that part of the state. But thank you for the work you do, and I appreciate being able to talk with you about some of these questions. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you. Next we have Representative DiCaprio, then followed by Representative Porter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Secretary, for your presentation. Just a couple of quick, couple of quick questions. Can Can you explain what the uptick is with the Medicaid?
Mm.
Just
Uh,
maybe on a very high level, but
Well, high level, it's $8 billion program. Half of it's paid by the state. We do our best to estimate what the caseload will be, what we will need to spend in that account to take care of all the programs that we have. And in our state, we have a lot of programs under Medicaid. Not all of our sister states have all the programs we do, or the eligibility thresholds or the benefit levels that we do. So we take the best estimate that we have along with OFA every year as to how much we're going to need to spend in Medicaid. If we guess wrong just a little bit on an $8 billion account, it can mean $100 million that we're off. So that's what we're recognizing. We've got a deficiency. We have to address $100 million. I'm sorry. Page 18 of the budget intro has a summary of the Medicaid issues that we're recognizing. We also do this every month in our letter to the comptroller. If you check our website, it also goes out with a press release usually. We recognize in the current year what's going on with Medicaid every month in terms of where we're seeing deficiencies or lapses. Lapses are good news. That's when we have appropriated money that we didn't need to spend. And so we're going to save some money in the general fund. It's good news to the state, I guess. It may not be good news to someone who thought they were going to get the money, but deficiencies are when we have guessed wrong, albeit a little bit. And so we are $106.8 million where the estimate was not quite right in terms of how much we need to spend on Medicaid in fiscal 25. So we have to appropriate that amount. Its caseloads higher, utilization's higher, all those large number of programs with fairly generous benefit levels are out there getting folks utilizing them.
the second question, can OPM provide a spreadsheet describing the migrant fund, the undocumented migrant funding we are allocating in the budget? Or is that somewhere in the budget that I didn't see?
That is one of the areas where we have higher utilization, and that is part of the Medicaid issue. And we can get you that information. I think it's also in our materials online as well.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Porter? And
Thank
followed
you.
by Representative Porter, Representative Kennedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your presentation this morning. My first question, I want to go back to where you mentioned that there was money for DOC for continued implementation of Clean Slate.
DESP.
I'm sorry?
DESP, state police have some new needs, IT needs around Clean Slate, not DOC.
Oh, okay, okay, thank you for it was clarifying, because I wasn't sure. The amount you said was it about half a million?
Yeah.
Okay,
$547,000.
$84, is that it? And can you just reiterate for me, please, what that would be used for?
So Clean Slate is the erasure of
Yes.
records. Folks, after a certain time in certain categories, there's a lot of IT work around that. It takes a lot to create them, and it takes a lot to just erase them to ensure that they're not accessed, because the law requires they not be accessed. So they've got to build all that in the IT and create other systems that make sure that it gets implemented.
All right, thank you for that. And the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, improving healthcare access and affordability. You talked about addressing medical debt, and I'm looking at 6.5 million in existing ARPA funding that will secure a contractor to erase a projected 650 million in medical debt for an estimated 250,000 Connecticut residents. So can you just expound on that a little bit? How is that going to happen? Look, will some of my constituents benefit? How does it work?
I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too. As a matter of fact, I hope I benefit.
So we got this. Okay. Could be too much information, but we got this idea. We brought this forward last year. We got this idea from some reporting. I think it was Governing Magazine, as I recall. Some cities in the Midwest had provided for this program. For a small amount of money, a nonprofit provider can approach hospitals or other healthcare facilities who have debtors. They have accounts on their books of folks who can't pay. Now, they may have written this off. They may have already taken a tax deduction or something for it, but those folks still owe it, and they still may go after them. So for a little bit of money, you can buy down that and say, well, okay, you're not going to get that $100, but here's $5 if you just wipe it off your books It's money they weren't going to get anyway, so they might be willing to do that. They'll then send a letter to that debtor and clear their debt, and they're off. They're okay then.
Okay, so the debtor will be notified once
Yes.
it's cleared.
Yes.
They won't be able to access, like, apply for anything. This
The
will
debt
be
will be
automatically
extinguished. Yes.
done on our end.
Yep.
All right, thank you for that.
And they're targeting folks under 400% federal poverty line. And the vendor's going to screen for that, or folks who have more than 5% of their medical debt is, for their income, 5% of their income, more than 5%. That's the target.
Thank you. I don't have any more questions, but I did just want to quickly state that I am definitely advocating for us to do something about homelessness. One of the poorest districts in the city is what I represent. I have mothers living in cars in this cold weather with their children.
Unacceptable.
Yeah, I mean, they don't even want to stay at the shelters because the shelters are not, well, they're not safe, they're not clean. It's a lot of issues around them, and that's nothing against the shelters. I know they're doing the best they can with what they have. But I wanted to stress that. And I also wanted to just kind of make a comment around the school lunches, because I can tell you, I'm getting several pictures from parents. And I hate to say that what's being served in some of the schools in the city that I represent, I wouldn't feed to my dog. So when we say it's being thrown away, we have to ask ourselves, why are kids refusing to eat the food? Is it nutritious? And is it really beneficial for them? I think we need to be looking at the quality of food that we're serving, and that those options need to include whole foods that are healthy foods that will keep children from growing up with some of the things that we're addressing as adults that I think are a result of not eating healthy and not having access to whole foods and healthy foods. So I want to stress that when we talk about school lunches. Let's make sure that we're giving kids the things that we would eat or we would serve. Thank you again
you.
for your presentation today. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Kennedy, followed by Representative Curry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. And I do apologize for not being there. Let's see, it is still morning, believe it or not. So I say good morning. Following up, I've been listening all morning. These are challenging times, certainly for everyone. And as Representative Porter just alluded to, our nonprofits, they are really struggling. And I don't see much of funding increases in this budget for our nonprofits. I hear on a regular basis of their challenges of retaining qualified staff, not being able to maintain salaries, and that's why many of their staff leave. And then everything just ties into what we've been talking about, what Representative Porter just brought up: homelessness, opioid crisis, food insecurity, mental health. That's everything tied into our nonprofits. And if we can't afford them the funding, the proper funding that they need, so they can meet their staffing requirements, so they can continue in helping all of these individuals and all these crises that are occurring, what is administration's plan to stop our nonprofit system from plunging into a crisis?
Well, I should have mentioned earlier, we do have the nonprofit grant program on the capital side that we recently stood up. That's been out of business for a number of years. We stood that up last year. We've gone through an RFP process last year. We're going through those responses. We hope to announce a round of grants this spring. This is on the capital side for nonprofits who have capital needs. So I think $25 million going out hopefully this spring. So that is something we're doing. There'll be another 25 million available in fiscal 25. You're right. They're an important part of our process. The staffing continues to be an issue in a tight labor market. It is hard to attract and retain folks. We're happy to have a conversation with the General Assembly going forward about how we can do better there. If we can identify resources that they could use and fit them within a balanced budget that complies with the caps.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate that. And I'm sure going forward with our subcommittee meetings, we'll learn even more. So I do appreciate those. I have a few other questions, but it's almost noontime and I see other hands raised. So I do appreciate your time today, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Curry.
Hey everyone, good afternoon. Secretary Beckham, appreciate you being here today. Quick question with respect to the VOAGs. I know somebody asked a question a couple persons ago. Is there any adjustments made in the governor's midterm adjustments with respect to current year funding for the VOAGs? Because I know that they've reported to us, I think that there's a $775,000 shortfall. And in conversations with SCE, it doesn't sound like there's any plans to FAC or deficiency bill that. So just wondering if that was built into your adjustments.
We do fully fund the statutory amounts in this budget. We didn't make any change in that. If you were going to increase that, we'd have to change the statute, but we haven't proposed that, but we do fund the current statutory amount for VOAG schools.
Is that based off of the actual current enrollment though? Because I think there was a misunderstanding around current services when the budget was done to ensure that that number was accurate. So I wasn't sure if there was communication between you and your folks and the VOAG teams just to better understand that number. And I hear what you're saying about following the letter of the law and within available appropriations and all that sort of stuff.
The staff advised me that I think you may be asking about FY24, the current fiscal year.
That is correct.
Yes. So the number this year doesn't, it says within available appropriations in the statute. So the number that was appropriated for this year in the underlying budget is not sufficient to make all the fully fund the statutory amount. But in fiscal 25, we propose doing so.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then just lastly, I just want to touch on, obviously, there has been some conversations around the shifts around the $150 million that was secured and signed into legislation with respect to the budget and the implementer bill last year. And, and I recognize that you have a job to do, and the governor is going to put forward some suggestions on how we may proceed. But I think that some of the comments that are being made today are a tad bit disingenuous and misleading. And I think to kind of play cute with the interpretations of what our intentions were, and we're always, since we've begun this fight for a number of years now around education with respect to those magnet caps and the conversations around saying, this is not going to provide for additional people, programs, or places. This is actual savings to boards of education. This is savings to municipalities who may not have to provide additional funding or don't have the means to tax their residents to provide that additional funding. I know that conversations are being had with respect to folks in MARB and outside of MARB that this additional funding is going to help them with actual teacher negotiations and contracts. So I think when we're talking about this, I think we need to just fully contextualize this and understand what this is and what the intent was behind this. But I appreciate your comments today, and I look forward to our continued conversations around education 0 all the way up through higher ed as we move forward through this process. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir. Next, we have Representative Delnicki, then Representative Johnson, then Representative Nolan, then Representative Harris, and Representative Hoxa. All of those are first-time people. So I will let everybody know we're now 2 minutes past what we had slotted, but we can stay here and answer all the questions we would like. So let's start with Representative Delnicki.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good to see you there. I know that you lived in South Windsor for a period of time.
We did.
Probably the
Great
best
town.
years that you had, right?
Great town.
So
spectacular Christmas display this year. So I drive by it where I go get my haircut.
good deal. I don't know if you're aware, and I don't know that the governor's aware, that South Windsor is the fastest growing DRGB in the state.
Fastest growing what?
DRGB reference for education when it comes to school children.
Okay.
And we've seen over the past 8 years, literally over 100 student per year increase in student population. And that's projected to continue going in the future. And I'd be more than happy to present the projections from Dr. Carter that you probably remember. She was a great superintendent when you were there. It's nice that ECS is being held harmless, but a community like mine is having that value go down as every student comes in. And literally, if you take a look at the past 8 years, we have seen about 888 student increase. And again, with projections going forward for another 620 over the next 6 years. So the question is this, is there any thought when it comes to a situation where you have a school system that's growing like that, so as to not necessarily hold them harmless, but actually give them the extra money to be able to educate the children?
The ECS formula is adjusted for enrollment, so that's one of the parts of the formula. So as we get more kids in the system, we do pay more from the state side for ECS.
So then we can present that paperwork, and is there any guarantee that there would be an increase in funding?
SDE, I think, would, happy to take a look at what you're talking about. Happy to bring in our SDE experts, State Department of Education, but ECS formula does account for enrollment growth.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and hopefully we could actually get some more support there, because South Windsor seems to be a prime destination for folks. It's a great place to live in. I'm proud to be representing it, and I want to make sure that we can continue to have a school system that is second to none.
Thank you, sir. Representative Johnson, followed by Representative Nolan, followed by Representative Harris, followed by Representative Hoxa, followed by Senator Flexer. And I would remind everybody that Madam Administrator said that we have to be out of here by 1 o'clock.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, Secretary Beckham, another fellow Eastern Connecticut resident. So it's great to have you join us in Eastern Connecticut. And I appreciate all the work that's been going on with the administration and working on making sure that we have equity in all of our access to education and all the things that you've worked hard at. I think there's been a good focus on that. My concern is that when we talk about the guardrails actually have historic meaning. When they were first put into effect, as I think I've mentioned before in this committee, under Governor Weicker, to change from the a tax that didn't include an income tax to an income tax, which also reduced the other taxes for people who are higher income. A lot of cost shifting has gone on over the years. And so after that occurred, we never got an increase in our education cost sharing grant. We were underfunded to the tune of $10 million from the time that the spending cap went into effect, all the way till we started to, we made the deal to start increasing it by about $1 million a year, slowly increasing it for all the towns that had been left out. About half the towns had been underfunded to the tune of that. So you have a history of cost shifting from the state, because this was a Horton versus Meskel case that was supposed to be providing those kinds of equitable cost-sharing grants to everybody, making sure everybody was equalized. And this kind of just fell by the by because, in part, because of the spending cap. And you can take a peek also at the problems with the spending cap back in the day when Governor Malloy put the legacy debt for the university pensions into the tuition costs. Again, a cost transfer from the state that hadn't been paying the pension debts that they should have been paying to the students that are going to school now with a 5% increase. So those are just a couple of things that I wanted to mention in terms of the spending cap and the guardrails. Not that all the guardrails are bad. Guardrails have done a great thing. They've made more room in our appropriations budget. They've made sure that we don't spend things unnecessarily on things that happened in the 1990s. Those times were utilizing spending things that, you know, didn't take care of the people, but just even failing to pay the pension debt down. Those are things that happened in the 90s, and they left a big debt when Governor Malloy came in and had no rainy day fund, nothing, and that's when I came in. So anyway, my question is having to do with the homeless in my district and the mental health issues in the Medicaid program. So what has happened now is I have 3 homeless shelters in a population of 25,000 people, 3 homeless shelters. I got the Eastern Connecticut State University. I have Quinebaug Valley Community College. I have the Votech School. I have the hospital, 2 rail lines and an airport, and 25,000 people. It's a lot. And so what I'm asking is, the homeless shelters in my district were put together by the Catholic Church, the Holy Family Shelter, Also we have some very generous people who have good resources, millionaires, trust funds that paid for the buildings for the no free shelter. Not the state. State didn't pay for that. Federal government came in and gave some money too. The state didn't do anything. And I have people who have had open chest surgery and have been put out onto the riverbank in the summertime. I have people with mental health issues that are living there now because there's no place for them to go. They try to get warm inside the waiting room of the emergency department at the hospital. I have a real problem
Representative
with
Johnson,
homeless
is there a
problems.
question here?
Well, I just want to, I need to frame it. And thank
Okay.
you so much for the reminder. I appreciate it, Madam Chair. So that I just want to frame what's going on because I don't think people really get what happens when I go to the store, see somebody out there with a, I'm homeless and please donate, every single supermarket in my district. Okay. So that doesn't happen in other of the towns that are really about the guardrails for everybody. And I'm not saying we should get rid of the guardrails. What I'm saying is that we need to be able to adjust it so that the students, so that the education, so that, and I'm just asking you, my question now is, how are we taking into consideration the historic impact of the spending cap and how we address these things with respect to our urban areas, with respect to our earlier rural areas? And I think that we're more impacted by this in Eastern Connecticut because we don't have, I like to say, there's no way out, at least for my district, because there's no highway in either direction. So anything you could do to help clarify that for me would be hugely appreciated. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I won't go on anymore.
Thank you. Let me try this. I don't think it's either or. I don't think it's the guardrails or helping people. We're helping people and we're better able to help people because we have the guardrails. The guardrails themselves have yielded $800 million of more room for you to spend on those people because we have paid down that debt. We're saving the actuarially determined employer contribution amount, $650 million so far, for each of the next 25 years, that we will have extra room in the budget to spend on those people because we had the guardrails. Having a full budget reserve fund itself, it's over $3.3 billion. It's yielding about $135 million of investment income. That goes to the general fund to be spent on the people that you want to help. As I told you on that slide earlier, if we didn't have the volatility cap and the revenue cap, we'd be $150 million in the red in fiscal 25. I'd be proposing spending cuts of the programming that you're talking about that helps people, or raising taxes, which would make us a less attractive place for people to come and start a business and live. So we don't have to do that. Sister states around the country doing that. They're cutting spending, they're raising taxes. We're not doing it here. We haven't cut anything in this budget. We are continuing to continue the historic investments we've made across the board in all these health and human services programs and in education and in higher ed. We haven't cut anybody in higher ed. So we're proud of that, and we should be. And it's not either or. The guardrails make it possible for us to do the good work that we've all done and all should be proud of, and taking care of the folks that whose cares are your concern.
I just want to thank you so much for that. But I do want to say, I hope we have consideration for some of these issues that have been ignored for a couple of decades. And I do appreciate your work. I just want you to know that very much. And I appreciate the time, Madam Chair. So, and I'd be glad to chat with you offline. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Representative Nolan, that was for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to touch on, Representative Felipe talked about funding for education, and what we promised our constituents in the budget last year was approximately $150 million in funding to help. And just to rewind with what you talked about, you talked about lessening it by almost $50 million, and you stated the reasons why. I just wanted you to just repeat that for me.
Sure.
I know the slide talks about ECS funding, charter schools, but these are still areas that our constituents are looking for help to try and better our educational system, and promising $150 million and then shifting things to kind of make it look like that we're doing increases and we're fully funding, but only to statutory amounts, knowing, especially for charter schools, how much we should be funding in charter schools versus how much we are. And the same with ECS funding, what we should be funding in ECS funding versus what we are. It just seems like we're short-sighting our vision, and we're cutting back on the promises that we shared or came up with for our constituents over the last couple of years. So can you just kind of like highlight that 50 million that you're talking about?
Sure. The 50 million didn't promise your constituents anything new in education. It was not new resources going anywhere. It was a cost shift of existing expenditures from the towns, the magnet sending districts to the state. Wasn't buying new teachers, didn't buy new slots, didn't give anybody a pay raise. No new resources were promised by you or anyone with that $50 million. It was just the state was going to pay some stuff that the towns are paying for. Nothing new.
Okay.
So we're recommending you spend more on education in terms of resources in the classroom than is in the enacted budget. There was about $102 million available for new resources in the classroom. We're recommending $107 million because we're adjusting the ECS number up for expenses we've identified since then for ECS.
So where do we get the $50 million that we need?
That
to
is
cut-
savings. That is savings to the state, to the general fund that we're not going to pay if we don't do this magnet school tuition cap change where the sending districts are capped at 58% of the liability to the magnet schools and the state pays the difference. If we don't make that change, state saves that 50 million and we can spend it on education and other programming.
And in regards to the guardrails, volatility cap, at what point does, because to my constituents, actually to all our constituents, a crisis such as education, a crisis such as housing, a crisis such as transportation, those are emergencies. And how or what level do you put emergencies at? What level do we, because it seems like different levels of emergencies. Our homeless persons have never been, our homeless population has never been at this size. I consider that an emergency. Our children crisis centers that we just got, that's another emergency. And I know you talked about funding that, but the question is, of course, the amount. Our food deserts in some of our communities, that's an emergency. So if we're still in an emergency, why are we not finding the funding or taking that volatility cap or that guardrail and saying, we are doing very well in savings and putting money away for the pensions. But sometimes I think what was planned to do years ago compared to now has probably exceeded well beyond what the expectation was, especially with our surplus.
Mm-hmm.
So why would we not pull money from those areas that we've done exceedingly well 2-3 times, probably even 4 times more than what we expected, and take care of some of these emergencies where our constituents can really feel it? I mean, we're doing a great job, I believe, but to us, an emergency compared to what our folk think are emergency, I think are two different levels of emergency. And I'd like to try and reach the emergencies that our constituents are in, not the emergencies that we always think we're taking care of, because I don't think that we're always doing as great as we can to answer the emergencies that our constituents are in. So how can we, is it a legislation change? Is it, because the governor can say an emergency is an emergency and he can shift some of that funding.
Well, you're a member of the Appropriations Committee, and we have an enacted 2-year budget that made a bunch of choices and made some resources available. We are recommending in our adjustments new resources for 2 of the things you mentioned, the urgent crisis centers for behavioral health, as well as the homelessness issue. within the context of our budget, within the context of our resources, working with the Appropriations Committee, we can come to new spending levels on all of that stuff we talked about. But we should at least see if we can do so within a balanced budget that complies with all of our caps for the reasons that I just talked to Representative Johnson about. Because if we depart from that, we may lose that ability in the future, and we may have to cut spending for stuff that you care about and you wouldn't want to see cut in the future. So for that stability, for that ability for us to continue to have those resources available for these important issues, which we quite agree with you, they're important. We're happy to work with the Appropriations Committee on all those spending levels and all those categories. But we have some rules. We can probably do more on some of those categories, but we're going to have to figure out what those allocations are. And I'm happy to work with the committee to do that.
Okay, so when you say we have rules, and obviously legislators understand the rules, but there are also, I think, rules that could change the rules, correct? Where that we can use more funding and we can invest more in those areas that we think are emergencies. So
Thank you,
I look forward
Representative
to
Nolan.
working with you on that.
Me too.
And you're welcome.
That the third one was sliding in there. I was just just wanted to let you know I got that one. But I hear you. I think your point was well made. So I thank you, sir. Okay.
I was getting a little excited.
Yeah, I know. Representative Harris. Representative Harrison, I'm sorry.
I'd like to go back to the the Tobacco Trust Fund, and cutting the funding to it. Am I correct? That it gets funded in April?
Yes, ma'am.
And so by the time that they put contracts in place and things and ways to spend it, the thought is that that money is supposed to last until the next April when they get funded again. So I think, and they are, up and running and trying to get, up to speed. So I don't think that we'll get to the end of any, we can get to the end of any June, and it looks as if there's a lot of money in that fund. So I just want on the record for us to understand that when we get to June, there could indeed be a lot of money in that fund, with the thought that it's supposed to be used to cover the services that we need until the next April. Rather than to say we should cut it because, or not fund it because there's excess funding in there.
Excuse me 1 second, Madam, did you already ask a question?
I did, but I thought I could come back around.
Yeah, but you're jumping in front of the people who
Oh,
have
I'm
it.
sorry. I thought you had the list.
Yeah,
just
I
wanted-
do have the list, and
sorry.
when they said Representative Harrison, I thought it was for the first time.
Oh, I'm
So
sorry.
we're gonna
I
put
thought
this-
you were on the second time.
No, we still are on first time. So just, could you hold that, please? Just
I
so-
will.
'cause
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I apologize. I did not realize that you had already spoken. Representative Hoxton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question for the two questions for the Secretary. First one is in regards to the ECS formula. It was the policy of the formula, and also as reflected by the numbers in the budget in FY24, that those the school districts that were deemed to be overcompensated were held harmless, as we call it. Does the budget, do the numbers in the budget for FY25 reflect the same policy, which is that those towns are still held harmless?
Yes, for FY25, the temporary hold harmless provision is maintained.
Thank you. And second question, shifting gears a little bit to another major problem that we have in this state, which is, food insecurity. I spoke to a local food pantry in my district, and I was absolutely astounded by what he told me, and I hope it's not true. And if it is, I hope there's a fix for it moving forward. That is that the Connecticut Food Bank which is the food bank that all the local pantries go to for for food, to replenish their inventories, was given only a little less than 900 grand for the whole state. Is that true?
I don't have that figure for the food bank. I'd have to look into that. Is that from agriculture? We don't know about that. I'll have to look into that.
Okay. And not a separate question, just some quick clarifying follow-up questions to that main second question, I guess. This is only my first time. Come on. Thank you. If you do in fact find that to be true, is there consideration for an adjustment to that for FY25?
I'm not aware of that line item, but I'm happy to work with the committee on any of these line items. If you feel that they are inadequate, we can work on those, and I'll be having many sessions with your chairman and ranking members over the next little while. Whatever we do, we just want it to be balanced and within the caps.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
For the first time. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary.
Senator.
Thank you for your presentation. My first question for you will not be surprising, centers around higher education as well. And as you know, I am very privileged to represent students at Quinebaug Valley Community College, Eastern Connecticut State University, and the University of Connecticut. More than 20,000 college students live in the Senate district I'm privileged to represent here. In 1991, the state support as a percentage of tuition students paid at the University of Connecticut was over 50%. And with the budget proposal in front of us today, for next year, it would go down to 19%. The numbers are similar, but slightly better, but similar for the community colleges in the state university system. In your responses to Representative Haddad's question in this subject area, you talked about other states and how their percentages in terms of how much they're funding public higher education is much lower. And it seemed to be a goal that Connecticut should get in line with those. Other states are making policy decisions around higher education that do not reflect Connecticut's values in a variety of areas. And I would suggest that we certainly don't want to be following the model of many other states in this country. So I guess my question for you is, where do you want to go? What do you think the appropriate level is for state support for public higher education? What percentage do you think we should be at in terms of your goal of being in line with other states?
I think that, first of all, it should be pointed out that our support of both systems, but particularly UConn, is only a fraction of their revenue sources. They have multiple sources of revenue, and they have many levers they can pull to adjust their expenditures up or down. We're not proposing a tuition increase. We're simply funding a level of state support that goes into part of their budget mix, and they have independent authority to figure out how to make that work. They can cut some expenses. In fact, in 2017, which was a tough budget year for them, there was a proposal that they cut about $100 million of expenses to be able to meet the state support at that time, which was considerably lower. They didn't do so. They cut about 24 million and then stopped. Had they cut the extra 80 million or so, they wouldn't have the issue they have today. They do a little bit occasionally, and then they come here and ask for the difference, and they wind up getting it. There's no real incentive for them to sharpen their pencils or become more efficient or become less top heavy, less overhead.
Can I interrupt you for just 1 second?
Sure.
Just for clarity, what year are you talking about?
2017.
2017.
We know that there was about $100 million at that time, figure identified that they should cut, and they were going to. They did about 20 million, and then they stopped. We don't have so the state support, and our materials show this. There's graphs and charts of the state support for higher ed, including UConn, over the years. It's always gone up. It's never gone down. We expect it to keep going up. I would expect it to grow by a reasonable amount in the future. There's a little bit of, we obviously know that they've got to pay increased salaries over time. They've got other costs that increase over time. We budget our agencies with increases as we go forward, something that's reasonable. But the state support that they're asking for continues to just escalate beyond what we think is reasonable. If it's in line with the current state support level, the current block grant level, and it increases at some rate that commensurate with, say, inflation or growth in personal income or something like that, I would consider that a reasonable increase. I wouldn't look to do less than that. But it can't just keep going at the rate that it's been going. And we simply ask them to give the taxpayers who are contributing this support value for their dollar and get more aligned with some of their peers around the country. It's their peer institutions. They have good values too. They are peer level 1 research institutions, world-class universities around our country having to do the same thing. And we're just asking that they do that too.
Just for clarity though, what percentage, my question was, what percentage do you think state support should ultimately get to for these institutions?
We consider on an annual basis how much we provide for increases to our agencies. We would do the same for the state support line for the higher education systems. It would not be an exorbitant amount. If we are growing, if we have cap room, if we have revenue, we would be looking at reasonable asks. I don't have a number in mind ahead of time.
Well, the graphs you reference in your presentation conveniently only go back to 2019. In 2010, state support for the University of Connecticut was $325 million, which is substantially more than what's proposed in this budget here. But we'll move on so I can ask my second question. My second question actually has to do with the nonprofit sector. Many of my colleagues today have already expressed concern that that is a area that has been underfunded for a decade and a half by state budgets, and the people working in our nonprofit sector have been doing so much to try to meet the needs of people in our state with less and less resources. I know we've all been listening to our constituents who receive services from those agencies, but also who work there. And just the other day, I'm sure many of us had a very similar conversation, hearing from someone who works at an agency supporting people who have better access to healthcare and other services than they do, because our nonprofits have been so grossly underfunded over the last decade and a half in particular. In your proposal, there is in a conversation, I believe, with my colleague earlier in this meeting, you talked about funding for homelessness and an increase in the DEMIS budget for more workers,
Yes.
more staff. Why not also match that with more funding for the nonprofit providers that are already doing the work around homelessness? How do you envision these additional staff at DEMIS to actually make a dent in this problem? And I don't have to repeat what my colleagues have already said here so powerfully, what a crisis we're seeing in so many of our communities around homelessness each and every day.
I think I'd want to talk to Demas and invite you to do so at the subcommittee hearing as to how the details of how they will roll that out. We do propose 12 new positions and considerable new resources for additional outreach. There's some existing teams doing this work. This would bolster that work. If there's a better mix of nonprofit and state workers doing that work, we'd happy to take a look at that with you in the committee as we go forward.
But why not make an investment also in the nonprofits?
We are. We have a $25 million grant program we're hoping to roll out this spring for capital needs that nonprofits have brought to us. They've gotten 13.5% increases in terms of their operating side over the last 4 years. We're operationalizing that in our budget, rolling that forward.
I appreciate that. But again, those capital needs are not going to give health care to that worker I talked with on Tuesday morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We will look forward to our continued conversations. I realized that I had 5 people that wanted to come back for a second time. And so if everybody's saying, I'm not giving everybody, no, 5 more people would have put us right up to 1 o'clock. So I look forward to the conversations that we have. Mr. Secretary, there are a lot of things that we know we have to talk about. And I want everybody to understand this is a proposed budget from the governor and the secretary of OPM, and it's up to us to sit and discuss and negotiate those items so that we all make sure that it's balanced and approached for all of our communities in Connecticut. I think the other issue is we look forward to talking about where we also allocate the ARPA funds, and I have quite a few things that I'd like to share with you personally so that you would understand where I was coming from, and I will be very glad to share that later, okay, with
Look
you?
forward to it.
So thank you, everybody, and obviously this is going to be a tough negotiation, and now we're down to 88 days after today. Thank you, Pat.